Hey, what's going on, everyone? Hope you're all doing good today. So, if you're keeping up with Total War Warhammer 3, you've probably noticed there's been another hotfix, and this one's labeled 6.3.3. Now, I know whenever we hear hotfix, it's easy to assume it's just another small patch that tweaks something minor, but this one's actually a bit more important than it might sound at first. It's not adding a new faction or campaign mechanics or anything flashy like that, but it's fixing something that caused a decent amount of confusion and frustration in the community over the past week or so. Let's talk about what actually went down, because the situation around this update is kind of interesting. When Creative Assembly pushed out patch 6.3 recently, they made a big change behind the scenes that removed the requirement for players to log into Total War Access to claim free content. On paper, that sounded like a great thing. People have been asking for that for a long time. No more weird login hoops or needing to go through a separate website just to get free DLC or extra units. It was supposed to simplify everything. But as often happens with these things, changing one system sometimes breaks another. And in this case, some players started noticing that certain free units, heroes, and lords that they already had before were suddenly showing up as locked. Now, that's the kind of thing that immediately gets attention because, let's be real, nobody likes losing access to something they've already earned or downloaded. The community started sharing screenshots, asking why their FLC content was suddenly grayed out or unavailable. People thought maybe it was a licensing issue or something to do with ownership through Steam, but it turns out the problem wasn't that complicated. It was just the way the game checked for who owned what. When they removed the Total War Access requirement, some of the internal ownership tags got mixed up. So even though you technically owned the free content, the game thought you didn't. And that's exactly what this new hotfix addresses. It's not about balancing factions or tweaking campaign mechanics. It's strictly about fixing those ownership flags. The hotfix basically restores proper access to all the FLC content you're supposed to have. So if you lost any of those free heroes or lords after the last update, they should now be back in your roster. Creative Assembly made a short official post explaining that it was a bug linked to the removal of the login requirement and that this patch corrects the issue. So while it's not a big sweeping update, it's an important one because it directly impacts how much content players can actually use. What's interesting is how this fits into the bigger picture of where Warhammer 3 is right now. The 6.3 update itself was already pretty hefty. It had a bunch of balance tweaks, AI adjustments, and performance fixes, especially for Immortal Empires. But there's been a bit of a trend lately where each big patch seems to need a few smaller hotfixes afterward to clean up lingering issues. We saw that with 6.3.2, which was focused mostly on AI, specifically fixing Lizardmen and Tomb King's behavior on the campaign map. They weren't acting as aggressively or intelligently as they should have been, so Creative Assembly quickly addressed that. And now with 6.3.3, they're wrapping up this ownership issue before moving on to what's next. Speaking of what's next, they've already mentioned that 6.3.4 is on the way and that it'll likely include some more AI improvements and balance tweaks. That's good to hear because one of the biggest ongoing discussions in the community right now is about campaign balance and AI personality. Some factions just don't behave quite right. They either turtle too hard, expand too fast, or don't interact with you in meaningful ways. So if you're someone who plays long campaigns and likes the strategic side of things, that's something to keep an eye on. But for now, this latest hotfix is mainly about making sure everyone has the content they're supposed to. Now, here's where I think Creative Assembly deserves at least a little credit. They've been a lot more transparent lately, posting hotfix notes pretty quickly, even when the update is small. In the past, there were times when they'd push an update and you'd have to wait hours or even days for the patch notes to show up. But now they've been better about communicating what's happening, why something broke, and what's being done about it. And that matters, especially with a game as complex as Warhammer 3. There are so many moving parts. Different factions, scripts, ownership rules, Steam integrations, that even one small change can ripple through the whole system. That said, the overall tone in the community right now is still kind of cautious. Players appreciate the fixes, but there's a bit of fatigue from having so many of them. People want stability. They want to know that after a major update, the game will just run smoothly without needing multiple follow-up patches. And that's understandable. Warhammer 3 is in a good place gameplay-wise. It's got an incredible amount of content, dozens of factions, and the Immortal Empires map is absolutely massive. But it's also a game that's constantly evolving. Every time something new gets added or reworked, it feels like another system somewhere gets slightly off balance. So these hotfixes are part of that ongoing process of fine-tuning the machine. I think what stands out most about 6.3.3 is how it highlights the delicate balance between making the game more accessible and keeping everything functional. Removing the Total War access requirement was a move toward convenience, which players have been asking for literally since the feature was introduced. It always felt like an unnecessary extra step, having to link accounts, log in on a separate website, and claim free content manually. So when CA finally said, you know what, we're just going to make this automatic, it was a relief. But the irony is, that very change caused temporary issues for some of the exact people who were supposed to benefit from it. It's a reminder that even positive updates can cause temporary setbacks when you're working with a system as old and interconnected as Warhammer's DLC structure. Now, if you haven't played since the last patch, here's a quick way to make sure you're on the latest version. Just restart Steam, verify your game files, and check that you're up to date. If you had missing content before, you should notice it's back now. And if for some reason you still see something missing, try reloading the launcher or clearing your Steam download cache. Sometimes it just needs a quick refresh. What I really like about this fix is that it shows CA is listening. The reports about the missing content weren't ignored. They were acknowledged, confirmed, and patched within a pretty short window. That's a good sign for ongoing support. It feels like they're trying to rebuild some of that trust with players after what's been, let's be honest, a rough couple of years in terms of community relations. The studios had to deal with a lot of backlash over pricing, communication, and content release cadence. So even though this hotfix isn't something that changes gameplay, it's part of that effort to show that they're responsive and still committed to improving things. And when you look at the big picture, Warhammer 3 is actually in a pretty stable place compared to a year ago. The performance is better, the mod scene is thriving again, and the number of active players has held up surprisingly well considering how long it's been since the game launched. A lot of that is thanks to these steady patches and hotfixes that keep ironing out the rough spots. Sure, they're not as exciting as new content drops or major DLC announcements, but they're what keep the game alive and healthy in the long term. It's also interesting to think about what this might mean for future content releases. If CA is fixing up ownership logic now, it could be in preparation for how future free content or updates will be distributed. Maybe they're laying the groundwork for a simpler, more unified system where everything is handled directly through Steam without the need for extra logins or external claims. That would make sense, especially if they want to keep players engaged with smaller free updates between major expansions. Now, let's be honest here. If you're someone who doesn't care much about technical details or ownership systems, this patch probably doesn't sound very exciting. It's not one of those wow updates that adds new units or campaigns, but for players who ran into the bug, it's a big deal. Nothing's worse than booting up the game and realizing half your content is missing. And the fact that this got fixed quickly means you can just jump back into your campaign without worrying about it. It's also worth mentioning that 6.3.3 didn't break anything else, at least based on current reports. Usually after every update, you'll see threads on Reddit or Steam with people saying their mods stopped working or their saves got corrupted. But with this hotfix, everything seems stable. Mods are fine, saves are loading, and performance hasn't taken a hit. That's a good sign that CA managed to isolate the issue and fix it cleanly without disturbing other systems. So overall, this update might not be flashy, but it's a necessary step in keeping the game's foundation solid. It's about maintaining consistency and trust and showing that even the smaller issues are being taken seriously. And if you think about how many layers of content this game has, the base campaign, Immortal Empires, multiple DLC packs, free updates, it's kind of impressive that it runs as well as it does after all these years. Every patch like this one adds a little more stability, a little more polish. If I had to sum it up, I'd say this hotfix is less about gameplay and more about housekeeping. It's a small cleanup that makes sure the game's systems are working the way they're supposed to. But that kind of behind-the-scenes maintenance is what keeps Warhammer 3 playable and enjoyable for everyone, especially long-term fans who've invested hundreds or even thousands of hours into their campaigns. And that's pretty much where things stand right now. Patch 6.3.3 restores your free content, fixes the ownership issue, and sets the stage for the next update, which we'll probably hear more about soon. If you've been holding off on playing because you were missing content, it's safe to jump back in now. Everything should be back in place. So yeah, that's the rundown. A smaller patch, but one that matters. And honestly, it's nice to see CA moving quickly and keeping things stable as we head toward the next phase of updates. Warhammer 3 is in a good spot right now, and if they keep this level of consistency, it'll just keep getting better. Let me know what you think. Did this fix the missing content for you? Are you still waiting for bigger changes, or are you happy just seeing the game get polished like this? I'd love to hear what everyone's experience has been since the update.